Welcome to In the Arena, a show where entrepreneurs and leaders take us behind the headlines and into the biggest crises of their careers and lives, and how they made it to the other side. I'm Jessie Janae, a startup founder and your host. Today on In the Arena, Erik and I are with Ryan Caldbeck, a tech founder who has taken great personal risk to make it clear for the rest of us that mental health, personal life, kids, and even investor issues should not be off limits for public discussion. He was the founder and CEO of CircleUp, a novel lending platform which raised over $50 million in venture during his tenure. Known especially for his thought-provoking long-form Twitter threads, Ryan goes even deeper with us today, giving us insight into the day-to-day experience of seemingly impossible tasks, like replacing himself as CEO and balancing cancer with startup leadership.
I was terrified because we just did not understand what was driving the growth. The growth was just happening. And that to some people that have never run a company before, never been responsible for growth, that sounds like a humble brag. And I swear it is not. It is absolutely terrifying, because you know that as soon as it stops, you don't understand the levers to make it start again. Mm-hmm. And that is every single night I go to bed and barely sleep.
I'm personally in awe of Ryan's ability not just to be vulnerable, although that's impressive, but to have enough self-awareness and intellect to parse his own difficult experiences into useful go-forward knowledge. It's just really rare. So let's jump in.
We are joined today by a very special entrepreneur who has been in the arena quite a bit over the past decade, Ryan Caldbeck. Ryan, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
I've benefited from your wisdom and advice over the past few years, and excited to share it with our audience.
Well, I'm really excited to be here, and I'm a huge fan of what you've been doing, Erik. So thank you for taking the time. You too, Jessie.
Yeah, so we'll jump you right in. I'm sure many people listening know that you've shared a lot online. Many entrepreneurs have benefited from your transparency. You have a thread where you go into some really amazing detail about the decisions and pressures you were under leading up to a pivot at CircleUp. But the moment, I want to thread a needle here. The moment that I'd like you to try to remember, if you can, is actually not when did you decide to pivot or when did you write this thread, etc. It's there's a moment, I'm guessing, you can correct me if I'm wrong, where things are so broken feeling that you decide personally that it's pivot or die, pivot or bust. There's some kind of low point where you're I think that I have to make a change. So the aha moment of figuring out what to change is a little bit less interesting to me than where the rubber really meets the road as an entrepreneur. And you're I can't keep going this way. Something has to actually change for the business. I'd love you, if you can, to try to pinpoint for us when you knew personally that a change had to occur.
Yeah, it is such a good question, Jessie. And I, as you were asking that, you can't see, but I'm getting kind of shaking a little bit, because it is I feel so much shame about the answer to that question. So it's a really good question, and I want to answer it because I wish that I had similar content, I guess, to look at when I was going through it. So the reason I feel shame about it is not because of the pivot, although I don't feel good about the pivot. But it's more because it took me just an embarrassingly long time to get there. And, I talked about this publicly, but just it is so hard to just admit, even though I've done it publicly, I spent months making a decision that anyone listening, if I laid out the facts, would have said, make the change. And it wasn't that I was refusing to. It wasn't that I was trying to figure it out. It was that I was stuck not making a decision, and stuck quite literally going into conference rooms and, without exaggeration, watching YouTube videos. I was trying to escape. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to escape actually thinking about the decision.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do and I felt lost. So I'd say it was several months of that. And I think the team felt more and more empowered over the course of those months to ask harder and harder questions. And that forced me to stand we would have a weekly one-on-one, weekly all hands, like most companies do. And it would force me to answer the same question over and over again with really bad answers. And hearing myself week after week, month after month, trying to do that eventually led me to say like, okay, something's got to change. And so but it was months and months of nothingness. And that was like the most embarrassing thing, was how long it took me to act.
I'm imagining that there's like, maybe it's like Sunday, and I'm just making these facts up. It's like Sunday, there's like an all hands Monday or something. And you just think to yourself, like, I can't answer that question that way again. Like you just kind of like, it hits you somewhere where you're like, I can't keeping on in this way. Like something has to give. But when you're sitting in that seat, the paralysis can be real, but I am looking for that knife edge of like, at some point the paralysis does end.
Yeah. Yeah. So the biggest kind of like straw, I guess, that broke it, which is going to sound really stupid, but I'll just be honest with you. It's the thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Is we made a mistake, one of 1,000 mistakes, of signing a new office space. My decision, my mistake, one of many I made. And the new office space was much, much bigger. And the concept of going to that office space, which we had signed, and seeing it empty was just like a punch in the face.
Yeah, like a bridge too far.
Yeah, wake up. You're not just trying to make it through one more all hands. You're going to move in here tomorrow or whatever it was, like a week from then. And you not only don't have the people to fill this, you want to cut people. By the way, you don't have any vision for how this thing will work, because clearly the marketplace that we were running is not working. And so it was kind of like a physical manifestation of the bad decisions, right? And that was the thing that probably forced me the most to just confront it.
I love that answer, actually, because that makes perfect that also makes perfect sense to me. The physical manifestation is so visceral. It's like, I'm going to be standing in like a cavernous space saying the same answers again. And like, now something's really got to give. Like, even though, again, it sounds like just this, like in the scheme of things, like your whole business and cash you had in the bank and everything, that the new office space is like just whatever. But I can understand how for you that makes it feel so real. And then just for just to put us in a timeline here, this is early 2016, right? Like you've got this office space and stuff at that time.
Exactly. Yeah. So we had just raised a $30 million Series C at the end of 2015.
Yep.
And the start of 2016 was awesome. We had an amazing January 2016. And the growth was great. It wasn't like world class, but like it was good enough to raise a $30 million Series C, which at the time was pretty good. Mm-hmm. And the investors were happy, the board was happy. And I was terrified. I was terrified because we just did not understand what was driving the growth. The growth was just happening. And that to some people that have like never run a company before, never been responsible for growth, like that sounds like a humble brag. And I swear it is not. It is absolutely terrifying, because you know that as soon as it stops, you don't understand the levers to make it start again. Mm-hmm. And that is like, every single night I would go to bed and barely sleep, and we talked with the board very openly about that. And a challenge that I had at that point in my career was we had some of the best marketplace and fintech investors in the world on our board. And their answer was like, look, sometimes marketplaces, when marketplaces have really hit, they grow for reasons you don't understand. And there's probably some truth to that. There is some truth to that. And I did a really poor job of communicating how confident I was that we understood none of the drivers necessary to grow the thing. It was just growing.
Laughing. Yeah, I'm sorry I'm laughing, but it is almost like this like true, that's like some real true cognitive dissonance as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Like, because when you get positive feedback from team, peers, investors, and yet you feel poorly about something, I don't think there's a more, like, that's an extremely intense form of career cognitive dissonance. And so how soon before all this pivot decisions and stuff is that? Like, are we talking like, this is like, you're feeling that, and then the ultimate pivot you need to do is like, it's a year later, it's 6 months later, it's 3 months later, like, just to kind of help us understand that piece.
I started feeling that in probably August of 2015. Mm-hmm. And then we pivoted, Q1 of 2016. So there was 4, 5, 6 months of that feeling. And it's funny, the board, I remember doing some reference checks during the Series C on me and in some hires. And the board would consistently say that one of their biggest nitpicks with me was that many of the other founders they worked with had a reality distortion field that, the founders would think things were too positive and they'd have to bring them down to earth. And they'd say, well, with Ryan, like, he thinks it's too negative and we need to get him more excited. Mm-hmm. And it's because it was not their fault. I was doing a poor job of explaining, like, no, we tried these 17 things. None of them worked. Here's how I can show you it didn't work. We just grew. We grew in this other dimension that we weren't trying. And then when we did try that dimension, we didn't grow. We grew over here, et cetera, et cetera. And that, it kind of came across like I was almost trying to sandbag, when in reality, like, I was terrified, absolutely terrified.
Turpentine is a network of podcasts, newsletters, and more, covering tech, business, and culture, all from the perspective of industry insiders and experts. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from AI with Cognitive Revolution to Econ 102 with Noah Smith. Our other shows drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, and investors, like Moment of Zen and my show Upstream. We're looking for industry-leading hosts and shows, along with sponsors. If you think that might be you or your company, email me at erik@turpentine.co. That's ERIK@turpentine.co.
And so that's the conversation happening at the board level. There's a lot of wisdom thrown around in blog posts and stuff about how your exec team is supposed to be your support and your rock. Yeah. And as a CEO, you're never really supposed to feel lonely because you've got this team of besties around you. I always found that was like, never really felt that way for me. I even though I felt like I had some really incredible people around. So I'm curious what that was like for you. You've got this board level conversation, and those folks control a lot of financial flows and whatnot. But then you've got these people who are supposed to be running the company with you. Yeah. What's that like? What's the exec conversation like?
I agree with you, Jesse. Like, I'm hopeful that when I start something again, I will have maybe it's courage and capacity, I'm not sure what it is, to be open with my feelings with the executive team in a way that I was with the board. I was more open with the board about how scared I was than I was with the executive team. The executive team would not have said that I was like, pumping my chest up and saying everything's great. But I certainly, look, I cried in front of the board. There were times when my hands were shaking in front of the board. Mm-hmm. I was terrified. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Much more so.
Yeah.
And there was some amount of vulnerability, but I also, and maybe you both have felt like this too, like so frequently being asked questions that put me in a mode where I felt like I needed to, give an answer other than my own feelings. Mm. Like, mm-hmm. Here is a reason to believe. And mm-hmm. it doesn't, I really didn't want it to come across as like a kind of like whitewashing or like, look over there. I was certainly never doing anything dishonest, but it was more, I kind of like disassociated my own fears from well, this is the vision. This over here is the vision. This is why it could work. By the way, it could work like that. It's just I was terrified that it wasn't going to. And I was terrified that everything we were doing wasn't working. And so I was sitting there with a team of people who were working really hard and trying to celebrate their work. And also trying to figure out, like, well, how do I decide what to do here? Because we're not on the right track. This isn't working.
Yeah, I also, in humility, maybe will somehow do better on our next time around. But I felt often I had to be Energizer Bunny, even with exec team, like meaning fuel, like provide the fuel, like the fire was burning, like continue providing the fuel. And I think that's a little bit of what you might be communicating there. But I've heard it's supposed to feel a little bit different than that. Like a concern I had was always that the morale of the exec team was just like kind of a sieve through to the rest of the company. And so it's my job to like keep them at a certain level because of that. And so the question is, did you feel that way? And then follow on is did that exec team stick with you through the pivot, just flashing forward? Because that's actually what I'm curious about. Like, can you bring those folks with you through the pivot? Or was it like they were just like not there with you ultimately when the rubber met the road there?
Yeah, great question. So first, the metaphor, I guess, that I used with the exec team that I shared with them, and I actually shared with most of the rest of the company, is I said, the startup journey is a bit of a roller coaster. And if I take you as an executive team or a company on all of my feelings up and down, I think that they tend to get amplified. Like when you see your CEO and he's like, oh my God, the world's crashing, we're going to fail tomorrow, or this is the greatest thing, we're going to take over the world. That I think is an unhealthy roller coaster to see from a leader. And so I would share like different levels of emotion, meaning I would share more with the executive team than I would with the full company. With the hope that they didn't have to go through that entire journey, that wasn't a healthy journey to go through. So the company would tell you that I certainly was not representing that I felt super confident in everything or that I thought everything was working really well, but they also would be and were a bit surprised to hear how emotionally difficult it was for me when I wrote about it publicly. To do it over again, I wish that I took the time to share in a more constructive way. Meaning, I so frequently just defaulted to don't share my emotions that I brought less of my whole self and people felt less connected to me. I think I missed an opportunity to build relationships, to build loyalty, which I'll come back to your question, did they stay? To build connection between them and the company, because I kind of walled myself off metaphorically in terms of not sharing, and literally,
and sometimes
by going in a conference room, and without exaggeration, sitting in there for a couple hours a day by myself. And by the way, like extreme amount of shame that I did that, but I want people to know, because I have talked to so many CEOs since that happened about their experience, and it is pretty remarkable how many people have like felt lost, didn't know what to do, but didn't know who to talk to, and just like stuck staring at a wall. I wasn't like making a lot of like calculations in my head and like doing all, like I was just trying to survive. And that was me like sitting and staring at a wall, frozen, just frozen. So I think that there's a phrase that I use a lot, Erik, which I think is probably related to what you're saying, is just appropriate vulnerability. And so I don't know that I totally subscribe to the theory of don't provide transparency when you don't have the answer, because I think that there are some people I think that most people at a startup are okay with some level of ambiguity that does not have answers. And that's why they join. And when they're probably not right for the startup anyway. Having said that, the degree of the importance of the question that doesn't have answers and whether or not the whole company can go along with you on that ride, maybe more of a case by case. The phrase though that I mentioned before of like appropriate vulnerability, probably not appropriate for me to stand in front of the company and say, I am frozen, guys. I don't know what to do. And I'm worried we are going to fail. And I'm worried that I am a bad CEO? Probably not. But I'm worried we haven't found the levers. Probably the right thing.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But I want to do a personal share here to give an example of something. I went through an acquisition process. I found out I was pregnant early in a year in 2021, and then we made some really tough choices that led to a massive layoff in the company, and also the company was acquired in the same year. Because we had to make so many tough internal choices, and because it's 2021 and people are working remotely, I decided my pregnancy was like distraction for everyone. But the longer that it went on, it was no good time to tell people, well, actually now I'm 6 months pregnant. Actually now I'm 7 months pregnant.
Yeah.
By the time the company got acquired, I was 9 months pregnant. I gave birth 10 days after we got acquired.
Wow.
And I told people after, like literally after, I was like, I'm going to give birth.
Wow.
So this is a share just to say that I don't know. When I look back, I don't know if I would have done it differently, because I can't know for sure if the pregnancy would have made anyone think differently about acquiring the company or any differently about my layoff choice. So my personal story is a way of me challenging you by asking, do you really know if in hindsight you should have been more transparent? Like at the time, I'm guessing you were worried about real business impact, like investors not investing, employees quitting. And those are the visceral fears as a leader you have. Like you don't want to handicap your own business. So it's a leading question, but I'm just curious how you really know, would you be more transparent in hindsight? If you can add any color to that, like, because in the moment you're worried about affecting your business, you know?
Yeah. Awesome. That's an awesome question. So probably my biggest regrets in that process was that I had not invested into infrastructure to help me before the process began. So that's going back to like the therapist, the executive coach, the CEO group, that I think is infrastructure that is just outrageously valuable for CEOs. And when you get into that time period, those difficult times, you can't take 30 hours to go find a therapist, right? It's not just doing your first Google search. And by the way, they're going to book it tomorrow. Like it's a lot of work to build that infrastructure in a way that works for you. And now I feel like it's a gift from God, the groups that I have there, the different resources that I have there. I wish that I had it back then. Mm-hmm. So on the point about like, would I have been more transparent? It's easy for me to say yes. And I think that the genuine answer is yes, but I don't know exactly when, how, where I would have done it. Mm-hmm. I think what I really wish is that I had people to talk about that with in a way that I felt comfortable. And so I could have run by Ed Battisti is my executive coach. Ed, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Like, how does this land? I could have run it by the CEO group. I could have dealt with some of my fears with a therapist, et cetera, et cetera. That like, I don't think it's as easy as like more transparent or less transparent. Like I want the process, at least for me, to come to that conclusion with someone else.
Totally. I think that's a really great point. I like how you're referring to that as like infrastructure. I don't know if you called it support infrastructure, but yes, like you can't, if you're going to build the plane as you're flying it, like, I don't know, I'm not going to complete this analogy well, but like you can't also like realize that you need to go to school for building the plane. Like you need to already have something like some onboard equipment, to do the incredibly hard task. I did have, to your point, actually, I did have an exec coach and some other, great resources as I went through that, and it made some of the choices a little bit easier. Not that I even made the choice as well. Who knows? I mean, we're all just kind of doing the best we can, but yeah, that's a really great answer. It's like the best you can do is build those decision toolkits for yourself as opposed to just being stuck in that moment.
Yeah. So I used to be a growth equity investor. So sometimes I use kind of wonky finance concepts, but I think of this as CapEx that you have to invest into, often like months or years before it pays off. And you cannot do that in the moment, right? So it's not like a COGS thing that's like an ongoing cost that you could pay to just like pick up the phone and call a therapist you've never met before. You're not going to get anything out of that. You have to invest in advance. And that's a thing that I regret. By the way, the concept of not sharing that you were pregnant resonates a ton. I am, very, very different situations, absolutely different. But like, I had cancer going through that process. I did not share that. I shared that with new investors that were going to come into the company and our board. I did not share it with the company.
Yeah.
I did not share it with people. The first time most of them learned about it was when I wrote about it on Twitter. And that, I think, was, I don't know. I'd love to look you in the eyes and tell you, like, clear cut, I would have done that differently in hindsight. Maybe. I don't know. I felt overwhelmed at the concept of having 40 conversations about my cancer.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And it also, it begs another question. The cancer, the pregnancy beg a question that around, what is there any division between a founder's personal life and business? Like, to a degree, I'm really not someone who believes work-life balance is even something to strive for. You should strive for like balance in general. Like just, you should strive for to be a balanced person and do what makes you feel good, yada, yada. But is there a personal life? Do you have a personal life as a founder? Like, is there any line? Is there any health condition or anything that isn't a part of the business? And I think cancer really draws that into starker profile, even than a pregnancy. I don't know if you have opinions on that.
I don't know. It's loaded, frankly. It's
Totally.
really loaded.
I'm aware.
I think I became a more effective and inspiring leader when I shared more about my personal life.
Mm-hmm.
So, for the first, call it 5 years of being a CEO and the first prior 10 years of my career, give or take, I'm not proud of this, but like more than one person at every company referred to me as like, is he a robot? Like, because I never shared anything about, like, no one ever saw me drink. No one ever heard anything about my personal life. No one ever, like, you might know that I'm married, but like nothing else about what I do outside of work.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tried to separate the two. I think that made it harder to connect with me and feel inspired. And so the feedback that I got, in the last 5 years of being CEO was dramatic. When I was much more vulnerable and open about my personal life, was much, much better than it was in the prior 5 years. So part of that maybe I would have been sharing cancer, but I think more of it would have been like sharing the pictures behind me, which are about my kids, right?
Yeah.
And bringing my kids by the office and talking about, I do play basketball on the side and I like that. And, like that kind of stuff.
I've played basketball with Ryan. He's very good. Excellent.
You're vouching for his
Just
basketball.
want to share more with you with the world.
Oh my goodness. So I actually feel free to share any other details about the pivot and some of the hard choices there, as sprinkle them in as you feel relevant. But I actually am interested in skipping to the moment in 2019 where you decide to share the thread that I referenced at the beginning. And people should all go check out this thread. I think if you just Google Ryan Caldbeck and probably Pivot, you probably
Pivot. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll link to it. But deciding to share that is an interesting choice. And at the time, the company is there's employees and everything. What's the reaction to the share? So we're talking a lot about 2016, and that's a really tough time, and just incredible respect to you for weathering that and also getting the company through it as a leader. But then there's a moment where you decide to share, and I'm curious your thought going into that, and also the response, not from the general public. I'm curious about the response internally. Like, what's it like to work at Circle Up when that comes out?
I'm laughing because it was split. It was very split. And this was not the only piece of content or tweet storm that I put out that had mixed reactions internally. So I forget how you phrased it earlier in this conversation, Jesse, but like I got to a point in terms of my loneliness as CEO where I started to share things externally because I just didn't see another path to feeling healthy. Mm-hmm. Like so I'm going to back up and just give you the reason why I shared this. I would so frequently be in conversations with other CEOs. You know, you go grab coffee with someone or whatever, and like they just tell me how they were crushing it. And every single time, I just feel so bad about myself and so lonely, and it was horrible. And by the way, this would even be happening. I'd even feel that way when I knew it wasn't true. Like I remember there were multiple times when VCs would set me up to have conversations with their CEOs, and they would say, this company's really struggling. It may not make it in the next couple of months. I go meet with the CEO. The CEO would tell me that they were crushing it. They quote, couldn't keep up with the growth. And the CEO would be bounced like 4 months later. This happened multiple times. And even though I knew that was the truth, I would still feel really bad about myself. There would always be a reason that I was failing. Like I just raised a big round, but you know what? They just hired Erik and Jesse. Right. They just hired this woman. They just did this thing. And like, I just feel bad about myself. I'd see a billboard on 101 or 280, and I know that that company couldn't afford that billboard and was wasting money. I'd still feel bad about myself. Just a sickness that I have. And so I, kind of got to the point of doing that for many years where I just felt so lonely, so lonely. My wife, she's smarter than I am. She was the CMO at a tech company called Coursera until she stepped down in the fall. And so she's very experienced in startups and everything else. And she'd be the first one to admit like that we had a hard time talking about it because she struggled to relate to the difference between CMO and CEO. Just like when you're the founder, like the weight that you feel. So I felt lonely. And I kind of just began typing publicly about my feelings. And I found that when I wrote, I felt better.
Yeah.
And it honestly, and this can be really hard for people to believe, like it honestly was not some grand scheme of like attracting users or building a brand name or anything else. I just felt better about myself when I was able to get it out there. There's some phrase I'm going to butcher now, but like the things that you feel most shame about, to talk about those, so it helps to lower the amount of shame and thus lessen the depression that comes from that shame. In this case, like the loneliness and the shame that I felt from some of our failures or some of my own feelings and whatnot, when everyone else around me seemed to be just like talking about how they were crushing it, that led me to write a series of these posts. And one of them was about the pivot. When I would write these posts, we had more than a couple teammates, be like, what are you doing? Why?
And how do you get that? Do they say that directly to you, or is this like you have to hear from others? Like how do you get this feedback? I'm just morbid curiosity.
The first couple times, they came to me directly. Then there was a
and
Slack.
Then after that,
well, we ended up, they stopped coming to me. And so they set up
like, it doesn't make it stop.
It doesn't. Yeah. So they said, my co-founder and our chief of staff, Emma, were the two people that like, I felt had a balanced perspective on what was good for my mental health versus the company. And I would listen to them. My co-founder Rory overruled me on a couple things that I wanted to do. But they ended up creating a Slack channel internally that would automatically pipe in my tweet storms and tweets, and like people would like, not be psyched about it or whatever. So some people didn't like it.
You could see that, right? Like,
no, I was never invited to it. I never got the invite.
Oh my gosh. But like, we can assume, you don't have to answer this, but we can assume you're getting some screenshots with like the emojis and stuff that people are using.
I kid you not. I never got a screenshot. I think that everyone
I would
knew
have
that I
sent you
didn't.
screenshots.
I think most of it was pretty good natured. I think that there was a lot more confusion than like actual anger. Like I think if you go through what I wrote, I don't think that people at the company would say that it hurt the company. It was more like, what? Why? Yeah. Really? Is this something that you're... But I think in retrospect, everyone that had concerns or questions I think ended up coming around to, oh, this actually is good for the company. Like this level of transparency, we had investors, we had PR, we had employees who joined Circle Up and said they read something about like the pivot, they read something like this, and they liked that transparency. They want to be a part of that.
That's amazing. And so that's a potent reminder that everything is a selection filter at the end of the day. Like at the end of the day, I mean, and everything is like, I mean that in the good way and the bad way. Like sometimes you filter out people you didn't want to by accident, and sometimes, but then other times the sharing though creates a filter. Like blandness is not a filter. And then you don't actually, create necessarily a brand or something for people to decide around.
It's such a good phrase. Like, you're right. Everything does become a filter. I remember we had an investor one time that we were talking to about our next round. And they said, you need to do, Ryan, you just need to walk into the investor's office and say, we're raising money. You can be a part of this train knot, and then walk out 5 minutes later. And he's like,
that's like what, some Silicon Valley. That's like the shows. That's like what they say 100%, on the show.
100%. And I'm like, have you read any of my stuff? Like, do you think that's consistent with my brand name? Like, do you think that's where I'm going for here? So that's a selection filter that like some investors might actually like, but those are not investors that are going to like me.
Yeah.
That's not who I am. And so, like the stuff that you see publicly, like, I think it kind of represents who I am. And then some people say, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to work with that person. That's good. Now we know.
What's the name of that Slack channel? Do we know?
I don't remember.
I just feel like the name would really say a lot.
It might have been Ryan's tweets. It might have been Ryan's tweets or something like
That's
that.
pretty benign. That's pretty benign.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're talking about 2016. We're talking about 2019. Here we're sitting and it's 2023 right now. You've continued to kind of grow in sharing more things online and stuff. So that's certainly not in the past. But is there anything you do want to share about how these experiences, 4, 5, 6, 7 years on, are shaping your entrepreneurial career now? Like, just a little bit about how some of these things sit with you over time, because we are talking about stuff that's just, many years ago now.
I got to say, like, it feels so much healthier to me today. My life feels so much healthier. Now I'm not a founder right now. I will be a founder again. But after I began sharing this stuff, like, the journey just felt so much better. And I've had so many CEOs come to me since I started doing that, like, saying that they wanted to write something similar, but they didn't know how, they didn't have the courage, they didn't whatever. There's always a reason that they couldn't. And I feel for them because, like, I don't think I had the courage to do any of it. I didn't think I had an option. I just felt completely at the lowest of lows. I couldn't get any lonelier. And so this was my way of not feeling lonely. It was not some grand, like, courage. It was just, I got nothing else. But because I was kind of like, I felt almost pushed into it by myself. Does that make sense? I feel more free and open. And I attract other people who want to work with me, who want to have those kind of conversations, right? Who don't want to just kind of BS each other about how everything's good. And so I'm able to now work with people who are willing and able to have a more open and honest dialogue about the reality around us. And that has been an amazing gift for me. And I think I operate much better in that environment. So look, I said to someone a couple months ago, I'm not making a joke. This is the truth. I think Twitter was better for my career than my degree from Stanford. Like, in terms of what added a lot of value to my life and allowed me to get new opportunities and everything else. Like, it has become because of what I've written on Twitter.
I want you to tell the story about your resignation or your stepping down, or kind of evolution to chairman. When you talk about when you realized that was the right time, and really just what advice you have for other entrepreneurs who are also 7 years in, et cetera, and think about, hey, is this the right next step for me?
So the first thing I would say is, you're not alone if you're thinking about stepping down. I thought about it for years. And during that process of thinking about it for years, I went to the CEO group that I talked about. It's called Leaders in Tech, which I'm a huge, huge fan of. And I cannot tell you how many sessions we had. We met for 4 hours once a month. How many sessions we have where I'd be on the way over there and I'd be thinking to myself, no one else feels the way I feel. And I'd get there, everyone else would share, it'd come around to me, and half of them had said something similar. You know, someone just raised a huge round and now they're sweating and they're saying, I just trapped myself. I don't want to be here. I want to get out. I want to get out. In my case, I had been working on that before that announcement for much longer than a year. I mean, it took me a long time to be able to get to that point. Now, part of it, probably 6 months of it, was me having the courage to say anything to a board member. But there was more than a year of me negotiating it with the board, trying to convince them that it was the right thing to do, trying to lay out how I could do it, and sticking to my guns, right? And so the conversations went some version of this, like, I need to go. Like, I can't do this anymore. Well, why? Well, I'm really, really stressed out. Oh, totally. Tell me about the stress. Well, I just feel like I'm doing too much. Oh, great. We should just get you some more help then.
Totally.
Okay. A couple months later. Well, I'm really stressed out. Why? Well, like every month I sell stock, my retirement stock, so I pay for my bills. Oh, totally. Let's give you a raise then, so you don't feel financial pressure. There was always a reason to like keep me in there, until my management coach finally just like grabbed me by the shoulders and said, Ryan, like, until you stop giving them reasons, they're going to keep trying to solve this for you.
Yep.
And eventually I had the courage to say, there's nothing. I'm leaving. I'm going to leave in a year. Yeah. And that was hard.
I found in your saying this, like, there's just such a different tenor to a communication where where there's no room for being convinced otherwise.
Yeah.
And it's not, and something that I think is like really lost I'll speak for myself. Sometimes in the CEO role, I'll speak for myself only, is it's supposedly up to you. Well, like, things are like, you're the CEO, things are supposedly up to you, but so often I phrase things as a suggestion. And it's like, to whom? Who's the fucking suggestion for?
Yeah. Yes.
Like, and so basically, like, let me ask you the question: what sort of mental work do you need to do where you're like, this is not a suggestion. I'm going to walk in this room and I have an announcement to make. The CEO of the company has an announcement to make. They're stepping down, and the CEO has an announcement to make. We're doing a layoff. Like, it's like, what is that tenor change of like the decision? Like, I'm not here to rationalize it. I'm here to tell you what's happening.
I mean, you would have saved me. I'm being serious, Jesse. You would have saved me a year plus of my life. Like, it just took me a long time to recognize exactly what you just said. I think part of it is, and maybe this resonates too, like when you're in the CEO spot, like, it just feels like you're there to serve. It feels like you are indebted to everyone else so much that you don't want to let them down. You know, whatever gene related to persistence exists is what will keep you in the seat. I mean, probably like both of you, I've had 50, 100 people in my life tell me I'm the most persistent person they've ever met, the most great they've ever met. I'm sure that's true for you and a lot of other CEOs. And that persistence is a double-edged sword. And in this case, like, that combined with my feeling of like serving them and serving like the investors who trusted me and gave me money, and the team who trusted me with their career, that like, I didn't feel the right to be able to say, no, this is it. It always came across as more than a suggestion, me trying to position it as like, I think this is better for the company. Oh, no, Ryan, you're the best person to lead this. So let's just get you the support you need. Let's get wait me a sabbatical. You want to take 2 weeks off? That'll be a refresher. It's like, no, it's not what I wanted, but now I'm going to leave until the next board meeting 3 months from now. And then we'll talk about it again there. And that was my failure. It was not them. It was me being ineffective in my communication and not doing exactly what you just said, Jesse. And just like, this isn't a suggestion. I'm going to leave, and we need to make a plan for me to leave.
Yeah, I don't have the answer, but I do think that there's a culture as well that might be shifting a bit, but the concept that a real entrepreneur never quits.
Yep.
Ever. Okay.
Yep.
There's just like that, no matter what people say, no matter what mental health conversations going on, no matter what is said, I still believe that is like just woven into the belief system so deeply that so for me, I had to switch to actually believing that the decisions to sell the business, everything were actually the best for the employees and investors. Like that it was actually, and it was actually up to me as a CEO. There was so much like psyching myself up, but it's actually a little bizarre in hindsight. Like that is actually what the CEO job is making the decisions for the company and and arguably you deciding that maybe someone else should be in that seat arguably is a decision for the company, not just for yourself. Anyway, I'm just kind of reflecting like, I think most CEOs are in that spot where you just feel like there is no recourse here.
I think it's amazing how many CEOs I've talked to, including some pretty prominent ones, that don't just say it as an offhanded comment, but like reach out proactively to say, I need to get out. How can I do this? It's astounding. Now, I think it's a slight tangent, but it's come back to what you just said. I think VCs have a really powerful microphone, and sometimes that is used for some amazing things. The microphones that they can have can help with pattern recognition and understanding how to build companies, et cetera. But there is a dark side to that power that comes out sometimes. And one of the areas I think it comes out is exactly this topic, that this concept of like the real founder, never quits. Like, I think that persists largely from comments that are made, not solely, but like largely from comments that are made by a lot of VCs. It's just so easy for them to say that, right? Like they're sitting there with a salary that's 20x what yours is and sitting on carry that's spread across 25 companies, 50 companies. They don't have it all based in one. It's so easy for them to say never quit. If they never quit, they will make unbelievable money and have a great lifestyle. And if you never quit, like you could kill it. It could be really dark. Yeah. So,
but your story highlights something else that is, I think, just kind of bizarre, and I feel about myself as well, which is like, why is quitting isn't like you didn't abandon everything about the business. Like quitting is also defined so rigidly that it leaves no room. For me, I felt like quitting was even pursuing an acquisition conversation. I thought that was quitting. Like that's literally the job. So I find that actually bizarre looking back is how many things I thought fit into quitting.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's a lot of things that are unhealthy about the psyche of the founder and CEO. And I think that is one. By the way, that translated for me to the pivot as well. Like now I think I have a much healthier understanding of what a pivot is. But at the time, I felt like it was quitting.
That was quitting.
It's like,
totally.
Yeah. And
totally.
It wasn't working.
It's literally
Why am
your
I
job?
pounding I'm pounding my head against the wall there. We need to change tact, but I couldn't get my head around that at the time.
All right. So we have just a few minutes left. I hope you don't feel like I'm ending on too much of a zinger, but I do want to ask about your decision to post an email of feedback that to an investor, but that felt like a very brave decision, but also a very specific one, a little bit more than just sharing your own personal experiences. So just give me in your head around that decision as well.
So loneliness was just a huge theme for me. And loneliness came about in conversations with other CEOs that couldn't be vulnerable. It came about when I would Google, what's it like to pivot a business? And the only thing that came back were just like amazing stories like Slack. By the way, the last couple of years, Scott Kapoor from Adjacent has invited me to Stanford to do a class on pivots with the founder of Slack, which was funny because I talked about, they're an example of an amazing pivot. And mine was pretty brutal. When I kind of go through each stage or, each decision or emotion, like I wanted to not feel like I was the only one struggling. Mm-hmm. And one of the most sensitive things for me, and one of the things that I felt the most lonely with and the least safe to talk about with others was the conflict that I had with a single board member.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the rest of the board members I've ever had, I've got along with incredibly well. Like they've all reached out about other jobs and, opportunities and working together, and and that's been amazing. With one board member in particular, it was one of the worst relationships in my life. And I never felt safe talking about it with another CEO. Never. Yeah. I always felt like I was the failure, and that brought with shame, which made me close down, which made the whole thing less healthy. And to be clear, I'm sure I made a lot of mistakes in the relationship. But the more important thing of whether I was like right or wrong in any given situation was I didn't feel like I could talk about it with anyone. And so I wanted to put it out there to help other people see, like, yes, sometimes the relationships just suck. You know, one of the books I love, it's over behind me, is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And in it, there's just the quote that I remember more than anything else was he posted an email from Mark to him saying, "Do your fucking job." So and I remember that so viscerally. Yeah. Because like, what a gift to the world to show that you two had a really unhealthy interaction. And it doesn't mean that the world's crumbling. It's just that interaction sucked. Because if I was on the other end of that email, that would have scarred me for life, Jesse. Like I would have never gotten over, like, if Erik had told me, "Do your fucking job." Oh. And so I wanted to post this email that I sent to this specific board member because I wanted other people to see, like, yeah, we had a really dysfunctional relationship. It didn't work. And you may be in a similar situation. That doesn't mean that I was right and he was wrong or vice versa. It just means like, this is part of life. So let's share some sunlight on this. And you may go through it too, and you're not alone. That's why I did it.
I think when you share, I'm sure people take from it what they need. I mean, that's the purpose of sharing as well. And so for me, reading that, my takeaway was kind of subtle, which is I in my whole entrepreneurial career so far, I have one investor I can think of that I had more negative interactions with. It didn't occur to me to ever provide direct feedback because I also felt as though it's only a bad look for me. Everything's only negative for me. Like I'm the one who's supposed to fix all the problems. And so but when reading your email, it's very constructive. So something, people slam people for anything, but your email is very constructive, is very detailed. It's not just general and slanderous in any way. And it just occurred to me like, wow, I guess there's a world where I provide someone feedback. Like it didn't even occur to me. So in that way, thank you. I haven't done it yet, so I'll let you know when I get the courage. But anyway, I just think that when you put things out into the world, you can't tell the consequence. And I think for each person who's receiving that information, the consequence is different. And that's what's cool about it.
The mission of Circle Up is to help entrepreneurs to thrive by giving them the capital and resources they need. And so I was in a mode for 10 years of trying to help entrepreneurs. And I knew that other entrepreneurs had dealt with this investor in a similar way or had dealt with some similar challenges. And I didn't just want to help them. I wanted to help any founder who was dealing with crap. And just from a mental health standpoint, you're not alone. But I thought that there would be a cost to that. Going back to your earlier point of like creating a screen so that people opt in to like knowing what it's really like to work with Ryan. Mm-hmm. What I wanted people to understand is like, look, I dealt with a fair amount of crap. I'm not sending this email with like one example. This was examples over years, but like, this was my limit. And if that limit's not something that you're okay with, then we probably shouldn't work together. I ended up getting positive feedback from it, but I haven't raised my money for my next company yet. So when I do, we'll see if they opt out.
I personally believe it's just like you're saying, a new selection filter that there's plenty of people who are, who have funds and whatnot, who will see that behavior and respect it. And also know that line is pretty darn high. Like your line wasn't low. It wasn't like some petty line. So anyway, of course that's me. But yeah, it's, I think, just really respect your approach and putting information out in the world and letting people take from it what they need to.
Yeah. To that end, Ryan, you've been in the arena for over a decade now, and for what will be a long time to come. Thank you so much for sharing your battle scars and your stories and lessons with us.
Well, thank you for having me. And truly, Jesse and Erik, thank you both for doing this podcast. This is an important one, meaning the series that you guys do and how you talk about these topics. I think it's just a wonderful gift to the community. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you as well. Thanks for listening to In the Arena. If you enjoyed the conversation, please like, subscribe, and share by leaving us a review and telling everyone you know. And please feel free to reach out to us on Twitter at inthearena_pod. We'd love your suggestions on who else has an intense experience to share.